Welcome back, dear viewers, and in this segment of the program we will talk about Egyptian-African relations and means of boosting these relations, and we are joined today by Dr. Yasser Tantawy, international relations expert. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
So, Dr. Yasser, as I've just said, that Egypt is paying great attention to the African continent, and the African countries in general. So, could you please shed more light on the long history that binds Egypt to the African continent?
As a fact, Egypt is having an everlasting relationship with Africa.
Yes.
Maybe it has some decays in the 90s and so on, but it doesn't mean it was vanished. We have a rebirth of the Egyptian relations after 2014, and it came up to a very structured anthem of cooperation. We need to remember that in the 50s, 60s and so on, we were having Al Nasr Export and Import Company, which is having the arm of Egyptian, let's say, power, soft power in the entire African region. And now we are having lots of companies, not even one company, like contracting company, agriculture, industrial supplies and so on companies. Egypt is having a model in cooperation that lasts for the last, you can say, 5,000 years. It started with Hatshepsut and where she started cooperation and sending political delegation and economic delegation to other nations. So we are doing the same. So we are doing a tradition that everlasting. The Egyptian model is based on cooperation and creating benefit for both parties, which is opposing the traditional colonization model acquired by, let's say, Western powers. So Egypt is based on cooperation, getting benefit for both parts. So that's why we are having, Egypt is engaged mostly through construction companies, agriculture companies, industrial facilities, power facilities, power
health
management.
Also, we have health convoys.
Health is a core, actually, and if you remember, after the destruction of South Sudan, Egypt was the first country that built up Al Nile hospitals in South Sudan and sending medical delegations and health delegations to South Sudan and other countries. We can see that Egypt power is coming, we cannot say soft power, practical power is coming from the extension based on mutual benefit for both parties. We can see that even in Somalia. We supported them unlimitedly, regardless of the situation they are having, based on that. So even Egyptian model is different than even the Turkish model in cooperation in Africa, because you are having other competitors, especially like not even West powers, but like Turkey and China there. But Egyptian model, because maybe of the distance, we are close by, we are in the same continent, we are having tens of years of history of cooperation and support. Especially we are having resources that could not be easily available to others for mobilization, accommodation and so on, like especially like doctors, teachers, religion parties and so on. So we are using also Azhar and the Christian Orthodox Church, which is another indirect powers to the state. So practically we can say that there are lots of dimensions Egyptian as a nation is using.
Yes.
Egypt coverage for Africa is part of the national security anthem actually of Egypt, and whenever there is a participation or possibility to cooperate, we are trying to take part of it positively, in which we could leverage the overall cooperative profile, and of course increasing the rate of security power to be assured. So yes, this is a model which is completely different from the colonization model occupied or acquired by other nations actually.
Yes, you were talking to me about the difference between Egypt's relation with the African continent and the European relations, yes, with the African continent. Can you elaborate on this?
We can see that the European model is having two points only. Number one, utilization and a full acquiring of natural resources, which you can find the old problems of like French and American companies back in the Africa is coming from, they are let's say have a monopoly for the entire national resources like mining, rare materials and so on, which is not our model in Egypt. In Egypt we are saying let's get benefit from both parties. That's why you can find lots of companies of countries like Burkina Faso and so on cancelling let's say Nigeria, Kenya, and so on, canceling lots of mining and natural resources utilization that is 100% acquired by the foreign companies. So technically there is no benefit coming for the local countries except maybe recruiting some hundreds of labor force, which is nothing. There is no economic benefit out of that except labor force and wasting the natural resources. In addition to that, they are using the military power by putting some under the claim of anti-terror and so on, which doesn't happen because we can see that they didn't do any action. They try to do some shows of fighting terror action, but we can see that there is a sort of calm and stable balance, just to let's be friends together and let's stay there forever. But Egyptian model is completely different. It's based on let's cooperate, let's generate power, let's provide electricity, let's provide plantation, white plantation programs, building dams for water resources, healthcare, education, and so on, which is for tens of years. I think all of us is hearing and having lots of information about how our perspective. Maybe we're having some decay durations during the 90s and so on, but it does not regret that we are having relation for hundreds and thousands of years, but now it is more structured into national and domestic benefit for both parties, which is completely different model. The clear model for that, you can see that in the Nile River resources, where we are having, like in Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, and so on, and in Somalia, this is a very clear model. In Sudan, we are having that model already working for tens of years, so nothing new, but it is more clear in the Nile Valley countries and in Somalia, where our model of cooperation is far beyond any other country. We need to admit that. Even we are close to Chinese model, but it is not the Chinese, because the Chinese model is based on loans. So whatever China is doing is against
China is
direct
showing
loans,
great interest in
direct
Africa.
loans. But we are putting our
mining also.
Yes, but Egypt is putting the resources under the base of national security. So there is mutual participation of both parties to make a peaceful regime by the end of the day, and to make economic benefit for both parties. Because if we are, let's say, providing proper utilization of water resources by the countries which is observing the Nile, that means we are getting benefit out of it, regardless it's direct or indirect. Yeah. It's the same about like power and so on. So, and that will create even more work plans for our local companies. So there are lots of benefits out of that. We are not focusing about just mining, human resources, acquiring, and so on. No, it's complete business. It's a business model which is based on tactical and daily operations. While other countries like Turkey, just an example, is providing strategic cooperation, like they can do some training, technical support, indirect consulting, which is, this model is very clear in Somalia, by the way. Turkey and Egypt is having bases there, but it's complete different model. The Turkish model is based on providing some training, some technical support, and that's it. But we build facilities, cooperate in imports and export, building ports, proper in let's say face-to-face training with their security forces to elaborate the capacity of their security fields and so on. So it's a complete different model, which is successful. We can see it's successful because the damage that happened for the Western alliances back in Africa is huge. We can say that Burkina Faso canceled more than 170 NGOs under the claim they have nothing to do because they didn't leverage the resources, they didn't do anything. Almost and all mining contracts were lost in Africa, especially the great loss was happening in specific to France. So all of that is turbulences that's happening, and it is irrevocable. I mean, those companies can get back, which will increase the capacity of African countries. We can see that we are having lots of experience in dealing even with the problems that happen in Mali currently. If you remember, a few weeks ago we were having an incident that a couple of I think 4 businessmen were kidnapped back in Mali, and Egypt sent a special envoy which was responsible about how to get them back, and they successfully get them back. Even other countries could not do that because we are having the same situation in Mali also, and other countries with the same situation about businessmen or workers kidnapped, but it was not revived until they paid a ransom, which did not happen in the Egyptian case. That means we are there rather directly or indirectly, and the arm, we cannot say there is national security utilized by, let's say, military forces, because military forces is a very, let's say, soft and dynamic coverage, because outside the borders, our diplomacy and political power is the military forces outside the border lines. So practically, that success in different locations is very clear. Even we can see that Egyptian companies are acquiring lots of projects which worth billions, while other companies from other nations could not do that, even in China level, even in Turkey level, even the Western European countries. Nobody can gain, because all of them is getting to the point zero, which is loans. So you are creating another burden. So if I have doubt that my partner is not paying, now I am sure he is not going to pay because of the loan, because of the interest, because of the complexity of the financial loan that they acquired. Why do we do it? Based on mutual benefit. So we are putting, let's say, assets, we are putting operational expenses there into different projects, but that we are having profit sharing. So it's business. We do it as a pure business model, which is, let's say, rational, it's logical, it's working. Not the point of we need to colonize this land. It is not about colonization. This model is, everybody understands it now. It's mutual cooperation and collaboration, and it cannot work else, because African countries is not like 50 or 60 years before, where there is no information, no education, and so now we are having that. If you remember, the power in Egypt in the 60s and 50s was based on education, and sending lots of educational delegations and acquiring lots of delegations. By the way, this is a key arm, which is Azhar is being just an example, and some Egyptian universities. Maybe we are using other pillars like refugees pillars and so on to support that anthem, to create like mutual benefit for everybody. But I think our approach was different, and as we say, it's a few thousand years ago, doing the same, by the way, in the same.
Yes, and we also saw that Egypt was also supporting Sudanese people in their crisis, and Egypt hosted many Sudanese refugees and supported the Sudanese nation in its conflicts. And Egypt also always shows support to its African neighbors. So what's your take on this?
We cannot say it's a tradition. We need to remember that Egypt and Sudan was supposed to be one country until 50s. So, and even after 50s, we were having an agreement with Sudan that we can acquire people from Sudan without having complexity of visas and so on. And I think even before war, there was more than 2 million Sudanese back in Egypt somewhere. Even lots of our political leaders was having a mutual Egyptian Sudanese nationality. So practically the relationship with Sudan is unique. It's an extension for the national security. It's the backdoor borderline, and of course there are lots of resources that we can share together with our experience. And if you remember, our delegation from Ministry of Water Resources is already having delegations in Sudan almost, I think, for more than 100 years now, and still working. And this is the most powerful delegation ever we have. The water resource delegation back in Sudan took care of river. In addition, our support to them in education, in hospitals, in even humanity supplies due to the crisis happened, and support the peace talks, of course. Even the crisis when the separation happened between South and North Sudan, Egypt participated to how to keep things without having confrontation, military confrontation between both parties. So we are hosting lots of political and peace talks to stabilize the Sudan. In addition to that, we are helping the Sudan as a nation to support them against the turbulences that started to happen through Chad and Mali, and turbulences actually. So there is a backfires coming in Sudan, and we are trying to be, let's say, proactive steps to as a precaution in which we could help Sudan to recover that. We are doing that as a clear dimension of our national security. So yes, we are having a benefit, and of course Sudan is having a benefit because their stabilization is coming, we cannot say for free, but as a mandate in the Egyptian politics. Actually, it's a mandate in Egyptian politics to consider Sudan's stability, which is normal, I think.
So, Dr. Yasser, Egypt has always been the gate to Africa when it comes to trade, to economic cooperation. So, how do you see Egypt's geographical location as a gate to the African continent?
We believe that since Suez Canal, and actually to be very clear, it was not Suez Canal. Before Suez Canal, Egypt was a cornerstone in the political environment for more than 3,000 years until now, by history actually. So practically with Suez Canal, it creates the links between continents together, and now Egypt is having more than 17 ports around the borders, which creates lots of transportation and facilities. So we can help in transits, and even in the economic crisis that is happening now in GCC countries concerning supplies and so on. Ports like Safaga and so on is properly utilized to support Saudi Arabia through shipments and so on. So the new modernization that happened after 2014 for our transportation system is a very clear anthem of how things should be done properly, because what we did before and everybody was wondering why we should do that, now is coming to attention. It was a fact, it was not a dream, it was something to be utilized properly. So imagine if we don't have those 17 ports now, what will be the case? So Egypt could be a very soft proxy and the transit region for the entire African continent, because we are having good communication with the entire region and easy transportation actually. In addition to that, there is already an urban highway which is going under construction that could connect Egypt with some other African countries.
This will facilitate the movement of trade.
Of course. So using our ports and industrial infrastructure and power infrastructure, human infrastructure to support the African countries, especially the countries which doesn't have coast or ports or whatever.
Also, I can see that many African cadres are sent to Egypt to get trained in different fields.
Yes, actually.
This is a form of cooperation also.
Actually, it covers lots of cooperation in, we cannot say education, it's
training.
Education and professional training, let's say. Professional training and lots of dimension in government, in security forces, in industry, in power and so on, which is a key milestone in our extension. And this is indirect power arm actually for Egyptian soft diplomacy. So we can say that there is a huge effort, but it is not seen, it's not obvious, because the only difference is that Egypt is doing that as part of the natural, let's say, political aspect which is going around, while other is doing that as an added value or something to show up. So we do it as part of our heritage, about part of our history. So everybody is convinced. So once you are convinced about something, you don't need to populate it, you don't need to expose it to others and so on. So it's going well, and I hope it will go better, and I hope that other Egyptian private sector companies and so on get more participation in those projects. Actually, we know that lots of Egyptian businessmen and Egyptian companies are extending over Africa for lots of private-owned delegations and so on to explore the opportunities, which is going well. Actually, we have very good success in lots of dimensions, even at level of very specific services like IT, information security, and so it's getting well in Africa through Egyptian companies, which is a very nice approach actually. It will leverage the business, it will leverage the cooperation, and as you know, it's always private sector who is always, let's say, the first line of diplomacy, the businessman.
So, sir, do you think that the African countries are also affected by the current war that is taking place in the Middle East?
we can say yes, and directly even, not indirectly, because the attention get back to GCC and the drop to Africa, but it creates another good point, which is the African countries understand that whatever was happening before was a big show to show that we are taking care of Africa, poverty, women, children, and so on, which was not the case. It was always about colonization. So once the power, the Western power, fail in sustain their existence in African countries due to turbulences that happened in the last duration, which is two things: the GCC issues and Iran, let's say Iran war, versus the termination of lots of Western contracts in Africa. It show up to the African countries the fact, the rational fact, which is nobody cares. So now they go back to the real situation, which is we need to do our own consortiums, our own alliances internally, and to get benefit from each other and utilize the current existing resources. And this is what Egypt is trying to convince the Union of African countries since 2014, once we get back to our membership there. And Egypt is pushing for that very hard to
African Union.
Yes, to create a consortium of different pillars in which you could have a mutual benefit for everybody. And of course that will resolve lots of political conflicts, because we need to remember that it's all 100% of the political and massacre issues that happened in Africa was caused by, unfortunately, colonization powers, which is abused the simplicity and the simple nature of African nations.
All after African resources.
Yes, running after resources. So to do that, we need to remember what happened in diamond mining in Liberia and so, which is caused and Rwanda, which caused hundreds of thousands and millions of killed people just to take some diamonds and so on, where people kill each other while colonized powers used to utilize and abuse the natural resources like diamonds, rare materials, and so on. So Africa is the richest continent in the world, but the most abused continent in the world also. But now I think we cannot say independency, but let's say to be dependent on each other and to be having a more realistic approach with other nations. And if you can see that once African countries start to put clear constraints about cooperation with other nations, everybody listened. The US, even the France, UK, and everybody listened, because they have nothing to do, because they know that they are exposed. There is no entry point anymore. And especially with the rise of the, let's say, the national spirit within the African nations, make things a little bit more different. So it was not anymore about how to get benefit of abused resources. I think it's a new trend which is happening now. Yes,
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Yasser Tantawy, international relations expert. Thank you for being here. And a short break, and we'll be back, so stay tuned.